My name is Jiles Smith, and welcome to Our Community. Welcome, Jay, to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We have a few questions we want to ask you, and if you don't mind, we'll just jump right into it.
Absolutely.
So, tell us a little bit more about your background. A lot of people want to know more about you. They've seen you. They've heard about you. Tell us about your background.
Well, I never set out to be in politics. Actually, I'm a video game developer. So I went to school, did my undergraduate at Caltech in Pasadena, and I was in computer science. And to make money on the side, I wrote educational software for textbook manufacturers like Addison Wesley and Scott Forsman. And one day there was a want ad that someone had posted on the bulletin board in our computer science department looking for an expert at a certain microprocessor. And I thought, wow, I'm actually an expert in that microprocessor. And so I returned the call, and it turns out that it was a company working with this company in Japan that no one had ever heard of before. They had an outlandish name. They called themselves Nintendo. And they were about to introduce their first game machine in North America, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES as we called it. And they were looking for people to help them write software for this. And it turned out it had that same microprocessor that I was familiar with in it. And so I started working, developing games on that platform, wrote some of the very early games for the NES, and that led to a whole career for me writing video game software. But I never thought I was going to do it for a living. I wanted to be a researcher at that point, so I went to UCLA. I was studying for my PhD in computer science and still writing games just to make ends meet. And then something happened to me that changed my whole life. One of the games that I'd written for the Sega Genesis, a game called NFL 95, an NFL football game, it went platinum, as we say in the industry, meaning it sold over 1 million copies. And I remember vividly looking at that sales tape and thinking to myself, you know, I actually could make a living doing this. And so when I left school, I started my company, Farsight Studios, and we've been doing video game development ever since. I've got 28 employees right now in Big Bear Lake. We do development on console platforms like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, all the Nintendo platforms still. But we also do about half of our revenue these days on mobile platforms. We do apps for iPhones and Android phones and tablets. We have about 30 million customers right now in 28 different countries all over the world. So it's been a very interesting ride. Going from that into getting into politics.
Oh man, that's great. But what is the difference between being a business owner and positions you have now in the state government? Is it a smooth transition? Was it a difficult transition?
Well, there are some things that are very applicable. So, for example, the ability to manage. I have a staff that I have to manage. I have staff in my capital office. I have staff in my district office. So that management skill comes in handy. Budgeting skill comes in very handy. I'm vice chair of the Assembly Budget Committee. So that skill is certainly applicable, scaled up to a state level. But there also another thing very applicable is that I know firsthand the challenges that small businesses face in California, having been an entrepreneur and starting my own business and running it for 26 years. I know what it's like to sign the front of a paycheck. I know what it's like to be awake at night worrying about the fact that whether or not you're going to be able to make payroll.
So with all that knowledge and expertise, what drove you to politics?
Oh, well, it's an interesting story, actually. One of my hobbies is I fly light airplanes, and I'm a flight instructor, and it's just something that I do in my spare time, not to make money. But because of that, I have been a tenant at the Big Bear City Airport for the entire 21 years that I've lived in Big Bear. And what you need to know about the Big Bear Airport is that it is a California special district. So the directors of the airport, the board of directors, are elected the same way that we elect our school board or our city council. So about 15 years ago, there was an opening on the board, and a few of the tenants got together and said, Jay, you ought to run for a seat on the board. And I said, guys, I don't know anything about politics or campaigns or parliamentary procedure, but they said, yes, that might be true, but you know business, you know management, you know budgets. And so I ran for the job, and I was elected, and much to my surprise, found that it really suited me. And so I served 3 terms as president of that board. And then when my term on the board was up, there was an open seat on our city council, so I ran for city council and was elected, served 4 years there. Ran for mayor and was elected, so served 2 terms as mayor, and then ran for this job, and was just reelected last year. So it's been a very, if I look back, if you would have told me 15 years ago when I was starting this whole journey, I would have believed that it would end up in Sacramento.
Can you list 3 challenges that you think California is going to face in the future?
Sure. Well, I think that the biggest challenge that we have is preparing for this transition from 19th and 20th century jobs into 21st century jobs. So we're going from an era where there was a lot of value placed on manpower into an era where there's a lot of value placed on creativity. And for someone just trying to make a living, it's a very frustrating and troublesome time to be looking for a job. And I worry that we are not preparing our youth for careers in that 21st century landscape. And so I am a passionate proponent of education. And I want to see us prepare our children for those careers to make sure that they can be successful and that they can actually have a standard of living that's higher than ours, because we're in danger of, for the first time, having our children not achieve a higher standard of living than we did. So that's something I'm very concerned about. I think it's both. I think it's an excellent point that you're making about the autonomous trucks, because that is emblematic of this transition that we're making. And there are a lot of people that are fearful of that, because if you're in the trucking industry or if you're a taxi cab driver, then autonomous vehicles scare the heck out of you because they're going to displace those jobs. But we have to learn the lessons of history. You think back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, where we had this group called the Luddites that went around burning factories because they said, we don't want automation to take the place of skilled workers, right? And that ignored the reality, which was that the Industrial Revolution catalyzed this incredible explosion of prosperity. You know, and I think that this displacement will also fuel a similar explosion of prosperity. But we need to make sure that we are prepared for that and we embrace it rather than being fearful of it. And that's where I think that we may be falling short.
So what are some of the key issues that up in Sacramento that are being addressed that kind of really affect us here in our assembly district?
Well, one of the issues that we're really struggling with is this overall question of poverty in California. So if you look at where we are as a state, it's very troubling, because we have simultaneously we pay the highest taxes in the country. I mean, we pay the highest sales tax of any state. We pay, thanks to our recent gas tax increase, the highest gas tax of any state. We have the highest income tax of every state. We have the highest corporate tax of any state. So you put all that together, and you think that if the problems that government is equipped to solve, we would be solving them. And yet we have, by the U.S. Census Bureau's Supplemental Poverty Index, we have the highest poverty of any state in the country. And that poverty problem is particularly acute in areas such as ours. And that's something that we are really struggling with, and I think that we need to get away from this mode of thinking that this is a problem that the government needs to solve. It's a problem that belongs to all of us as a community, and we need to come together as families, as churches, as charitable organizations, and as cities and counties to solve this problem instead of expecting somebody else to take care of it, because it is very clear that the state is falling short.
So you subscribe to the thought process that government really can't solve all the problems. I'm speaking for you, tell me if I'm wrong. Can't solve all the problems, but there's a void that's put there that churches, religious organizations, and even families can step in to fill. And that's how it should work.
Absolutely, and here is the really corrosive thing about this mode of thinking that government exists to solve those problems, because the moment we accept that that's government's responsibility, then we abdicate that responsibility ourselves. And that's not a responsibility that can be abdicated, because if you look throughout human history, the most effective advocates for solving those problems have been the people that are closest to them, those people that say, look, I can't eat the whole elephant of poverty, but I can eat a bite of it, and here is the problem, the specific problem that I'm going to solve. I toured earlier today a factory that, as a charitable organization, takes old wheelchairs, refurbishes them, and ships them off to third world countries to people in need. And you think about, the slice of the population that they are serving, it's very small. They're certainly not going to solve the issue of poverty by themselves. However, they are providing free wheelchairs to a lot of people that need them and can't afford them. And so if we have enough people that are solving little problems like that put together, then we can solve the problem of poverty. But we absolutely cannot be accepting of this thought that it's government's responsibility to do that and not our own.
The state budget process, you just talked about how you just came down from Sacramento a few minutes ago. Let's talk about that.
Sure, so I'm the vice chair of the Assembly Budget Committee, which means that I am one of a group of people that sets the budget every year. And the way it works in Sacramento is the governor proposes a budget, then the Assembly creates a budget, and the Senate creates a budget. And after that, just in front of the June 15th deadline, which was coming up next week, to pass our budget, a conference committee on the budget is created, which is a small group of people that sit down in a windowless hearing room in Sacramento, and we hash out all the differences between those three budgets, the Assembly budget, the Senate budget, and the governor's budget, to create one overall budget for the state of California that hopefully both chambers can pass and the governor will sign. So that budget conference committee is something that I've served on for a couple of years. It's incredibly big responsibility. It's very challenging, because you have to get spun up on all of these different issues, and the decisions that you're making are affecting millions and millions of people. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars that we make the decision of, is it spent here, is it spent there? Is it better to expand this program and at the expense of this program, or create a new program? And there are people that are extremely passionate about every single issue on both sides. So that's been a real challenge, but it's something that I really enjoy.
Do you have to cut out fat in that process?
Yes, and my own opinion, I'm pretty fiscally conservative, and I don't think we've cut out enough of the fat. If you look at the finances of the state of California, most people are very surprised to learn that over 2/3 of our state budget is dependent on income taxes, just a single source income tax.
Wow.
And we have a very progressive system of income taxation in this state. Of that income tax, more than half of it is paid by less than 1% of the people that live here. So not even talking about whether or not that's equitable. That's the system we have, and unfortunately leads to a very unstable revenue stream, because that 1% of the people, they are not paying tax on salaries. They pay tax on predominantly two things. They pay tax on business profit, and they pay tax on investment gains. And so when we get into even a mild recession, both of those things go away, because if you're in a recession, by definition, the economy is contracting, businesses aren't making money, there's no business profit to pay tax on, investments are not gaining in value, they're going down in value, there's no investment gain to pay tax on. So what you see is that even in a mild recession, we lose half of our income tax revenue, which is 1/3 of our overall state budget. So it makes it very challenging, because when economic times are relatively good, as they have been in the state of California for the last 8 years, we need to spend less than we are able to spend, remembering that inevitably when we get to a downturn, we're going to have less money to spend than the need. So unfortunately, many times we fail to keep those historical lessons in mind while we budget. So I try and be the voice of reasoning, reminding everybody that we can't say when the next recession will come, but we can say with certainty that one will come eventually, and we need to be prepared. Yes, although I would say an even more pressing problem than that is the businesses leaving our state. And as evidence for that, I mean, we have economic studies that have been done that correlate the businesses leaving with more businesses coming. But 10 years ago, everyone had maybe heard of a business leaving or a person that you knew leaving the state, but no one actually was personally acquainted with one. You'd heard about one, read about one in the papers, but maybe you didn't know them. But now I know multiple people that have retired and left the state, and businesses that have either closed or relocated.